Welcome to RAIN's webinar. We are beginning now. A few housekeeping notes. The chat function has been disabled. This webinar is being recorded, and we will email you a link later this week. Today's webinar is hosted by RAIN's Managing Director and Head of Security Officers Practice, Patrick Gray, as well as Senior Vice President and Head of Agribusiness, Melissa Oszustowicz. Patrick and Melissa are joined by Elad Yoran, Executive Chairman of CoolSpan and CEO of Security Growth Partners. We hope you enjoy their conversation about cybersecurity leadership and how organizations should be thinking about and preparing for the ongoing threat of cyber attacks and ransomware. And now, over to Melissa.
Sorry about that. Elad has 2 decades of experience in cybersecurity industry, and the companies he has founded or managed have been acquired by some of the most well-known security organizations in the world, such as Symantec, McAfee, and SafeNet. Among other accomplishments, he is a member of several technology, security, and community boards, including the FBI Information Technology Advisory Council. Welcome, Elad. Every 40 seconds, a new cyber attack starts. Ransomware attacks are increasing at a rate of over 400% year on year. Each day, hackers attack over 30,000 websites, and over 65% of organizations worldwide have had at least one cyber attack against them. This year, McKinsey assessed the cybersecurity maturity level of more than 100 companies and institutions worldwide in a number of industries. Results revealed that while some in the banking and healthcare industry have achieved fair progress, most organizations in all industries have much yet to do to protect information assets against threats and attacks. The dangers are real, and they're swiftly growing in number and severity. These threats are what drove us to put together today's discussion. So to start off, Elad, are organizations taking cybersecurity seriously enough and putting in strategic plans to protect and prevent against attacks?
Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Melissa and Patrick. Nice to be here with all of you. It's an interesting question. Are organizations taking cybersecurity seriously enough? I would say historically, it was not the case for many, many reasons. Cybersecurity was seen as a cost center. It was difficult to measure for the value added benefit of incremental spend. Security ROI, or sort of return on investment calculations, are notoriously subjective and unreliable. And added to all that, security introduces friction into the workflow for employees, customers. It was in the technical sense, it was a pain in the neck to use. So that was a bit of, so historically the short answer was no. I said, thankfully, many, but not all of these things have improved. And so now the answer is more and more are taking it seriously enough. What would I say? Some industries, as you pointed out earlier, are clearly more advanced and are early adopters than others. You mentioned financial services, healthcare, and so forth. But truthfully, this variability exists in every industry and across across different sized organizations. Having said that, the clear and unambiguous trend is taking cybersecurity more seriously, for a variety of reasons. I think first, the frequency and severity of attacks the direct financial impact as well as the operational consequences. You mentioned ransomware obviously has tremendous implications beyond just the financial impact. Another cause is the increasing regulatory framework. Different industries have different sets of regulations, FFIDC and financial services, HIPAA and healthcare, et cetera. Although regulatory compliance of cybersecurity is good, in largely speaking, it's I think we should all think of it as a floor rather than a set of best practices. And so we'll need to we need. And too many people, unfortunately, too many organizations think that the regulations define what they need to do and not more. So I don't know if that answers your question. I'll tell you sort of the concluding thought on that question. Sophisticated organizations now see cybersecurity as not only a risk mitigating cost center, but as an enabling requirement, enabling them to do what they want to improve their business, become data-driven, service customers, adopt new technologies. Directors are paying more attention. These are all good and important trends, and hopefully they'll continue.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point, kind of the sophistication of organizations and the other part, cost center. When we look across industries, there are some industries that have a very good presence of CISOs in their organizations. Then some organizations, they may have kind of a junior IT person managing security. And when we talk to those organizations about the importance of cybersecurity and the importance of bringing in a security person, it kind of goes to cost. And my question to you, if you were kind of that small, mid-sized, and even large organization, is bringing in a CISO or a security leader, worth the cost at this point?
Is it worth the cost?
Yeah.
That's a tricky question for someone in my industry. The short answer is there absolutely has to be someone who is responsible. We had talked about organizations, are they taking cybersecurity seriously enough? And one of the things I'd mentioned earlier is that boards of directors are increasingly paying attention to it. That is a fact. Many boards have, and I think all should have, a security committee, a cybersecurity committee, just as they have an audit committee, a comp committee. And so they need to think about the composition of the board as it relates to the skill set and knowledge set, at least. Not maybe if not to be a cyber expert per se, but to at least be able to ask the right questions and manage through that process. And it flows from there, in my opinion. So they absolutely need to have someone or a set of people working on cybersecurity. Now, fortunately, nowadays there's an entire marketplace of choices of alternatives available to organizations in terms of how they should think about their cybersecurity. There's clearly a whole industry of advisors and consultants. There are managed services that are available there. So an organization doesn't necessarily need to take on the entire burden internally. I think that's actually very hard, almost impossible for organizations to do, even the largest of the large. They all work, right, with a combination of inside and external resources. So yes, it's an imperative. They need to have someone there.
You bring up a good point about the board composition and maybe having a board committee. And obviously, if you want to be on an audit committee for a publicly traded company, you have to have certain qualifications to be to sit on that. Have either been a CEO or a CFO, I don't know, if maybe a controller at a publicly traded company and signed financial statements previously. What are your thoughts about the types of expertise or experiences you think a board member should have around cyber to kind of qualify for that risk oversight? understanding that they're not going to be computer coders or maybe have been hackers or whatever themselves, but what do you see as some of the qualifications you would say about a board member that would give them, the expertise to manage that risk, or at least ask the right questions?
It's a great question, Patrick, and I think it's, I would kind of turn it by looking at, boards, not just on the cyber sense, but in technology across the board. What kind of technology are we using? Why or why not? Is it providing a differentiator to us? Is it, or perhaps a competitive disadvantage? And we always talk about competitive advantage, but perhaps a competitive disadvantage. Why or why not? I don't know per se that they need to have expertise or let me put it a better word, perhaps experience in the cyber, in the cyber sector. As one looks as at, especially when one goes up the organizational hierarchy with regard to security, I would tell you, if you look at the CISO, profile, CISOs have to be able to understand, the right questions and to ask, but they equally so they have to have the managerial and the interpersonal skills of a C-level executive, and I'm just mentioning that as because they have to manage up, they have to manage down, they have to manage laterally, and I'll elaborate a little bit. Certainly when it comes to managing up, they have to be able to manage up to, and work with other C-levels, whether they're reporting into the CEO or the CFO or COO or what have you, and obviously up to the board, to be able to summarize where things stand, to present it in the context of business terms, to talk about the implications for budgets and priorities and so forth. So very sort of, classic business kinds of conversations. They also have to, of course, manage down. If one looks at the security organization, oftentimes it's programmatically structured. So you'll have people that work on things like vulnerability management. You'll have application security. Obviously, there are people that focus more on containers. You'll have incident response and red teaming and those kinds of folks. And it has to be able to manage those silos, if you will, within the cyber sector, but then to put them into a holistic organizational level perspective. And he has to be, he or she, the CISO, has to manage laterally. And one of the things that's really interesting about the security organization per se is that the CISO does not control the systems and infrastructure, if you will, where the security issues exist. Those often are the domain of IT, of engineering, of DevOps, of other functional areas within the organization. The people in those groups don't report to or work for the CISO. They have their agenda and their prior set of priorities, and this is where the communication element is so critical, to be able to work with the head of IT or the head of engineering or the DevOps, or depending on where the issue lies, to report issues, to assign priorities, to make sure that things get remediated as they come up, and so forth. Those are skills that you wouldn't necessarily think are technical skills, but they're part and parcel of the CISO job. I don't know if I answered your question, yep, Melissa, about the board. I would say the board, there's a similar set of skills on the board level. And these are, that's what you need.
Absolutely. Elad, it's interesting. We've had a lot of discussions with private equity firms, and this isn't just relating to just private equity, but when talking to these PE firms about cyber, we ask them, how are you doing due diligence to your with your, potential acquisitions, but then how are you managing cyber attacks or ransomware within organizations. Because one PE firm said to us, we almost lost a couple investments because of a ransomware attack. Thankfully, we had cyber insurance that helped us. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts around cyber insurance, because I felt when we had that discussion that there was, a sense of real security having this insurance. But is it a false sense of security? I mean, is that the way organizations, who might not be able to kind of build a security structure within their company, is that the fail-safe for them? If you could comment on that.
So you asked, I think, two questions maybe in there. Let me just see if I can understood. The one was first question was about PE firms and perhaps due diligence, and maybe a related question or on cyber insurance. I'll try and take them in turn, just real quickly. So first of all, with regard to PE and due diligence, I strongly recommend institutional investors, PE firms, conduct cyber due diligence on all their prospects before investing. I mean, as a condition to closing transaction, to closing an investment. I mean, to me, it seems you're not doing your job if you're not also doing cyber diligence on your prospects. You'll learn about the risks and operational conditions of the company, where added spending may be required. That's going to impact your budget and your forecasts and so forth. You learn a little bit about management, if they're taking, how they think and operate. If they're taking, in my opinion, what might be unwise shortcuts, or perhaps the other way around, or far worse, that the company may have been compromised. Or IP has been stolen. There also may be hidden liabilities with regard to, some regulatory issues, and other important risk elements that need to be planned for. So yes, conduct due diligence. With regard to cyber insurance, that is a dynamic area. I mean, one wouldn't normally think of insurance as being dynamic. No insult intended. But this is an area within the insurance industry that really is quite exciting, and there's a lot of activity. It's changed quite a bit over the decades. I started getting involved with this notion of cyber insurance and the relationship between technical cyber assessments and risk mitigation on the price. The premiums that the organizations may pay for cyber insurance, and that's because in all candor, for many years, and still to a certain extent, it was swag. These premiums are priced, perhaps higher than they should be in one sense, because the actuarial data sets aren't large enough or precise enough to be able to price the policies the way sort of more traditional sets of insurance is priced. The other set of issues that deal with this relate to what conditions the firm, the organization has to take in order to qualify for the insurance and eligible or not. The equivalent of, do you have the smoke detectors? Do you have the locks on the doors? Have you taken other measures that are reasonable to protect yourself? And a lot of those things are in a constant state of flux, as well as practices evolve. And so the book hasn't been written on this area just yet. It's an exciting story. I think it's going to be an important part of the landscape for us in the future, but it's still early days in the insurance world, in cyber insurance world. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
Yeah, I think
it's a moving
was
target. Sorry, go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, what was interesting is I think Melissa made the point. They kind of look at cyber insurance as their as their safety net, and is it a real safety net, or are they just thinking like, hey, insurance will handle it? And then there's the regulatory side of it. Is we've had some talk recently, as you heard about the I forget the name of the company, but the pipeline energy issue where we might go back to the old days that we don't negotiate with terrorists, which means we don't pay, be against the law to pay ransomware. How does insurance fit into that regulatory framework if you're thinking that your risk is managed by paying an insurance premium at the end of the day?
Yeah, it's all about risk transfer, and they may say, well, you haven't acted with sufficient due care to be eligible for that risk transfer. And you'd mentioned the pipeline scenario. That's a super interesting example about how quickly sort of this evolves. For many years, organizations, industrial organizations, manufacturing, and others that operated in kind of more operational environments saw themselves as being, to a large extent, insulated from sort of traditional cybersecurity issues by virtue of being physically separated or air gapped, if you will, from the broader internet. Added on top of that, they used to, they would argue that their systems were based on a different tech stack than traditional IT environments, different protocols that fewer people knew, that certainly fewer hackers knew, and therefore about what we would call in the industry sort of security by obscurity, they would be a little bit more well protected, but they've learned, and we've learned over the years, that that these things are clearly not the case. The Colonial Pipeline example is a great example, and many others where you see industrial IoT, operational networks, SCADA networks, and other sort of control environments being impacted by cyber. I don't know if this relates to insurance or not, but it's these are this speaks to kind of the dynamic of nature of the industry and the environment that we're all dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to just ask you, when we're thinking about large companies, small organizations, they all have different needs, resources, but as on a whole, if you had an opportunity to talk to just, because we do have a number of leaders on this webinar, are there any recommendations you would make for them to protect their companies if they're just kind of starting to think about this issue, or if they have, an organization that they feel is pretty robust? What might you recommend to those leaders?
It's a good question. So I think every organization, large and small, obviously has to think about cybersecurity. They should have someone responsible for it. If it's a CISO, if possible, especially for the larger organizations. There are various schools of thought as to where and at what level that person should sit in the organization. I believe strongly that they should be separate from and independent of IT or engineering. CISO should serve as a partner to IT and engineering on the one hand, and a check and balance on the other. As far as reporting structures, that they can report to any number of other executives, obviously to the CEO directly. I've also seen CISOs report to chief risk officer, chief security officer that may have responsibility for both sorts of cyber and physical and so forth, but also to the CFO, to the COO, even I've seen to the chief legal officer, general counsel. All possibilities varying along with the culture of the specific organization at hand. Regardless, the reporting structure should provide the CISO with independence, I think, from IT, engineering, and DevOps because of that check and balance that's required. That's an important place to start.
If an organization doesn't have the means to hire a CISO, and they have just kind of more of a junior person in their organization, do you recommend kind of the same thoughts on where this person should sit, like not sitting in technology, the IT organization? Is it the same type of organizational structure that you just provided right now, if they're not a quote unquote CISO?
Well, listen, at some point, the organization all sort of the reporting structure all consolidates, to fewer and fewer people, and ultimately the buck stops with the CEO. So if it's a junior person, perhaps there'd be more. There are many more places where they can go, but ultimately it's imperative that whoever quote owns security has the freedom to maneuver and to be able to report back what needs to be done. If the organization, for example, has people writing applications and internally developing code, it's the responsibility of the security, wherever they sit, to be able to say, is that code secure? Should it be deployed? How into production environments?
Yeah.
And so and if there are security issues within the code base, to be able to say, hey, this needs to be fixed, and because it's a sufficiently high priority or severity, it needs to be fixed under accelerated timelines. It needs to be fixed perhaps before it even gets into a production environment. A junior person may not have the wherewithal to say that to a CTO, for example. I mean, I'm kind of giving you an example. So wherever they sit in the organization, they need to have kind of the ability to be able to participate in those conversations and play the role that they're supposed to play.
And I know we're running short on close to end of time, but I did want to ask you one question, because you started off saying, organizations can't do it all. So they need to kind of partner with outside organizations to help them. Are there any recommendations you would make when a company is assessing an outside partner to help them with their security issues? Are there any areas that you should kind of advise them to say, hey, look at this, make sure they have that, etc.?
Well, I mean, you obviously want to know that they can do what they claim.
Yeah.
It's diligence. It's talking to their customers. It's talking to your peer organizations and see what they're doing, and making sure that any external resource that you bring to bear has the professional knowledge and experience to handle what needs to be handled. I mean, it's the same thing that you do if you were hiring a lawyer or hiring an accountant or so forth. You want to make sure that they're sufficiently qualified to do the job. The good news for is that there's a whole marketplace of advisors, of consultants, of managed service providers. These are people that perform many of the security functions on a subscription basis, so it can be done almost kind of on an operating budget level, instead of just paying, per project or per acquisition of technology that you may not want to do. There are lots of alternatives. I am a fan of some form of continuous monitoring. through through a kind of either an insourced or outsourced operations center model that looks at not just incidents and signs of malicious and or suspicious activity in the form of attacks and or hacks, but also looks at the state of hygiene, if you will, of the attack surface, because organizations are very, our businesses today, they can be agriculture industries, or they can be big banks, or they can be what have you, but everyone is becoming data driven. Everyone is uses technology to service customers, to sell, to market, to improve operations, and the technology that we use evolves very quickly. There's cloud, there's mobile, there's operational networks we talked about earlier. The landscape of how we operate is changing on a constant basis, and so our security has to be 24/7 on a constant basis. I mean, you hire a new person, you fire a person, you use a new an application that you hadn't used before. You have a new supplier, a new contractor, a new service provider. There's all kinds of issues that get introduced into the environment those ways, and so continuous monitoring is a very important element on both a suspicious, malicious, I would call sort of like the attack monitoring side of things, but also just on the hygiene of the environment and paying attention to all those things that are always changing. Just because you were secure yesterday doesn't mean you're secure today. You're doing new things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think we've gone over a little bit of time, but Elad, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us and our audience your thoughts on cybersecurity. It's a very important issue, so really appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome, Melissa. I'm happy to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Bye, Patrick. Bye, Melissa.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us today for RAIN's webinar on cybersecurity leadership. A recording will be sent in the coming days. If you would like to continue discussing cybersecurity leadership, Patrick and Melissa's contact information is on the screen now. Follow RAINS International on LinkedIn for the latest thought leadership and our next webinar. Thank you.